weight of others on his shoulders. That's why a proverb says about this quality of the Pashtuns that Pashtun never picks up a light weight. I quote, Pashtun never picks up a light weight. That's why if a weight of another is put on his shoulder, he will shoulder it happily by saying in the words of a Pashto proverb, if a little more weight is added to the back of a camel, it doesn't matter. A true Pashtun will always wish good for others. Pashtun has always passion for sacrifice, and this passion of Pashtun is found in Pashto tales, proverbs, and folklore. One of the Pashto Tappa is the most famous folk genre of Pashto poetry. It's a folklore. A famous Tappa says like this, Kame Zaga Share Pasarda Janana Tabako Bahmad Krisatma. Translation. My dear friend, though I myself am wearing a rough blanket, but I will keep you in a shawl of velvet. Hafiz Ramakhanu Hila writes in his book, Khulasa Ansab, that the Pashtuns have the tradition of spreading carpets for others and would like to sit on a mat of velvet. Apart from Raw, the land of the Pashtuns, only the example of the Afridis. Afridi is a tribe, might be sufficient who wearing the shoes of grass and wearing rough cloth themselves, but got the Hindus laden with gold and silver. It is astonishing that today the world is not aware of these people. Their politeness and Pashtuns who ruled India for centuries were made laughing stock by the Mughals through various manners. This was because of the political rivalry between Pashtuns and the Mughals. The Mughal court historians were ordered to write impolite and uncivilized things about Pashtuns. After the Mughals, this campaign was carried on by the British. And communication of the Pashtuns with India was made almost broken. They were divided and disunited. The age-long trade and commercial relations of the Pashtuns with Deccan and northern India and Central Asia were brought to an end at the time of the British rule. Lohani, Ghilji, and Saravan tribes had trade relations with Samarkand, Konkan, Khewa, Khotan, Bukhara, Badakhshan, Merv, Tashkent, and other commerce centers of Central Asia. On the one hand and on the other, they had commercial relations with Shikarpur, Multan, Lahore, Delhi, Golconda, Bejapur, Bengal. But they were deprived of these relations, which resulted in their economic destruction. On the other hand, they were politically blockaded and were defamed outside of their land. You must be knowing Iqbal, the great Hindi poet, has pointed to it in one of his couplets like this: those youth who would establish kingdoms were confined to their own mountains, but this confinement was not their own fault. It was the result of those political conditions which were created by the advancement of the British from south and Russia from north. Ian Wilbur, an American historian, writes about the Pashtuns and their land. He said, I quote, "The land of tribal tradition and love of liberty, a turbulent but stirring history and a glorious ancient past." Before the British, the Sikh is an ethnic group, treacherously occupied an area of the Pashtun for a little period, but their rule was limited only to the city of Peshawar. Though the Pashtuns at that time were fighting among themselves, but it has been the tradition that whenever are attacked from outside, they make a truce for the time being and collectively fight the invader. This kind of temporary truce or ceasefire is called Tiga in Pashto. Many battles were fought with the Sikhs. After the Sikhs came the British and occupied only those parts of Pashtunkhwa in the beginning which were under the control of the Sikhs. Then a new series of battles started with the British Indian Empire. Before the British, Pashtun had been fighting with the Mughals. The impact of this continuous fighting was the economic weakness for Pashtun on one hand, and on the other hand, they were cut off from the rest of the world. The great game being played between Russia and the British on the land of the Pashtuns. First, second and third Afghan wars affected the people in multi-dimension. These wars, though fought by the British as part of their great game, but it paved the way for so many social, political, cultural and economical changes, and also to some extent geographical changes as well. As a result of these wars, the land of Pashtunkhwa was divided. In other words, a nation was divided. The Duran line, which was drawn between the Pashtuns in 1893, but long before that, the political authorities of the British government had started political tactics to change the large Pashtuns culturally by introducing Urdu as medium of instruction in the schools of Pashtunkhwa instead of Pashto, which is the mother tongue of the people. In fact, the British government wanted to amalgamate the area under their control with their Indian Empire because of its strategical significance, but the British government faced a severe resistance in doing so, particularly in the tribal area, the area where nowadays you must be listening to the news that fighting is going on. Anyway, so by doing so, particularly a new series of battles called Ghaza or Lams were started with British in different pockets of the tribal belt. This was an emergency situation for the whole Pashtuns. So instead of progressing politically, socially and culturally, the Pashtuns were caught in a consecutive wars. The Pashtuns severely resisted the advancement of the British troops. To a greater extent they were successful, but not knowing the political diplomacy, they ultimately were so weakened, they were led to make treaties with the British formality because they would prefer the British instead of the Russians. On the other side, the Afghan government had become so weak that it had to compromise with the two great powers of the time and the main players of the great game. Waziristan, Khyber, Tira, Moman, Swat, Bajawar, Malakand, Guneb, and Ambera are those battlefields in which wars the British were fought on Lower Pashtunkhwa